1.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Owl Nest. I'm Brendan Rice, and joining me today is Hiccup.
As
Hey, Hiccup,
always,
how's it going?
I'm confused after this week's matches.
I am stoked. I've got to say, you know, I thought Stage 3 finals were awesome, of course. I think that last match, the final game, is going to go down in history as one of the best matches of all time. And I'm stoked. I think, you know, the start of Rollock. This is a good time to be in Overwatch.
I think the start of Rollock is funny though, and a lot of people talked about this when we knew Rollock was coming, where everyone was like, "It's a band-aid fix." The developers were like, "Yeah, we can't balance goats. We'll just let the system do it for us." And they could have
Yeah,
picked
and
any number of systems, and they picked Rollock. They could have done a pick ban system, but I think Rollock works. I think you lose some creativity with Rollock because, I mean, we saw right at the end of Stage 3 that teams like the Dragons were actually figuring out comps to beat goats. So by having Rollock in there, you kind of lose some of that. But I
it's
mean,
true.
it's exciting to get in there because now we haven't ever had this in the game or in the league. So it's interesting to see what the future will look like if future things get implemented like this.
I think one aspect of it is now we have it, like it or not. It's here, and I think it's here to stay. And with that, I think there's a lot of discussion to be had. This is middle of the season, huge change. Uh, and to start us off, I think it would be interesting to talk about who do you think are some of the big winners, some of the big losers of this in the league?
I so the big winners when I think about it, because of Roblox's nature, teams that can't adapt quickly I think might get left behind, right? Because we had teams that were good at goats at the end of stage 3, but like they started and they didn't quite know what they were doing. They were a little slow to pick up on changes in the meta. So for instance, like the Spark at the beginning of every stage took like a game or two to actually figure out what they were doing. So teams that are slower to adapt are probably going to struggle a little more. But then there are other teams that have really good DPS players that weren't able to play DPS that can now
Yeah,
do
I
that.
think one that really sticks out, and we'll probably talk about them a little bit later, of course, are the Justice, you know, with
Yeah.
Corey and Stratus and stuff. And I think there are several teams like that. Do you think any of the top dogs, like maybe New York or Vancouver, are at risk with this?
I think Vancouver will be fine because they were in contenders before Goats. They were playing other things that were fine, and they've got good DPS players, and as a team, they're pretty cohesive. I think the top 3, Vancouver, Shock, and New York, should be okay, but as we saw this week, maybe New York's not okay. But
Yeah.
Shock and Titans seem to be fine. They've got structures in place and they've got the players they need to be able to do those things. I think New York could struggle a little bit. They showed this week they didn't quite know what they were doing. And I think the teams that'll struggle the most will be teams that have have a lot of players to fill each role, as opposed to having like one or two that like can play everything that's needed. Whereas if they have to, the more that you have to switch DPS players in and out in order to cover the roles that are being involved, right? Because this week we saw a lot, specifically a lot of snipers. We saw a lot of Mei, and then unless your name is and if your name is Chengdu or Shanghai, you just kind of throw caution to the wind and play like Doomfist and Pharah and stuff. So like team like New York, like Nene is the only one that can play a sniper. Sebilby
Mhm.
isn't a sniper. He's a tracer player. Libero
Yeah.
is like Libero plays Mei, but Sebilby doesn't. But if you're wanting to play, tracer, you want to have Sebilby in there, but that means that you're now losing out on Farah Hanzo. It's like teams like New York that are kind of locked into their DPS when you throw them in, and even teams like Shanghai, because it's like if you're gonna put Ding in, well, you're gonna play Farah Hanzo. You're not gonna put Ding on other things.
Yeah.
But I think teams will figure out their own niches because, I mean, what we saw in the developing meta this week was Orisa Hog. It was either
Yeah.
Orisa
A lot of
Hog or
Risa
Orisa
Hog or
Diva.
Risa Diva. Yeah. Um, which is interesting. It's it's nice to see a different tank for a change. We went. Well, it's been 2 years without any Orisa play, pretty much. Um,
Yeah.
and
It,
she's just as boring as she was before. I'm just kidding.
Well,
No,
no,
she's
I think she's fun because the way that teams are playing her, because when we saw Arissa first get released last year, she was used with
yeah,
Hog just to go because her halt naturally pairs with the hook. And so the halt hook works really well, but then so there was two distinct ways that teams were playing. They were either doing Orisa Hog and they were playing with a Mei and then like a sniper or another DPS, or they were going Orisa Diva and playing double sniper. Those are like the two big ones we saw, unless you were playing on control, in which case it was more Wrecking Ball and Winston, depending on
mhm,
if you had the point or not. Because teams, if they were having to recapture the point, they would switch to Winston because you couldn't really initiate with Ball too much unless you were Chengdu, in which case you'd play Ball all day every day. And so those were what we saw, but it was as the week went on, it because at first I was wondering and watching like why, because in my mind the Orisa Hog May comp is just inherently better unless you're playing
yeah,
on like Junkertown where sightlines are big, because when you play the Orisa Diva you're relying so heavily on your snipers to pop off, and if they don't your front line's gonna get run over. So I like the Orisa Hog May comp allows you to have a sniper out doing and shooting from the distance, but then you can also just run over the front line. But
yeah,
if you don't have a good hog player, then you won't be able to do that, and so you kind of have to default. And I think that's where the interplay was coming in, is that some teams were much better with the snipers, some teams were better at the hog, and that when two teams would mirror, one team was definitely not as good as the other one at that
yeah.
time. And then teams were swapping in Sombra and Reaper occasionally, and if you're running the Orisa Hog and you're not running a Mei, I think it's worse than the Orisa Diva double sniper. I think the Mei is what makes that comp. At least that's what we saw. But they were running the Mei as the rush comp, and they weren't running a Reaper. And typically in the past we've seen Mei and Reaper put together, and we only
Mhm.
saw that a handful of times on Control. Like the Justice ran it, but every other team that ran Reaper was like specifically on Control, and typically was run with either a sniper or a Sombra. And it was
Which one
even
thing one thing I noticed is, man, it seems like Control completely different meta than anything else. Like Control has come out, and it's always kind of been that way. Like even during Goats, a
mhm.
lot of times on Control maps, we would see teams pull out all sorts of different things, and I really like that about Control. I think another thing with it is it seemed to be different every map. Every map in Control kind of has its own meta, and it's been interesting to see that evolve. If any map is going to bring out some of the weirder picks like the Pharah and the
Mhm.
Doomfist, it's going to be on Control, and
Yeah.
I think that's been interesting to see.
Yeah, the meta on Control is different from the meta on the rest of the maps. Although we did see a few times on Ilios, particularly like on Ruins, there were teams that were pulling out the Orisa Hog. But most of the time, teams are leaning towards the Winston Ball, unless it's obviously like Lijiang Control Center, in which case you're gonna be running a different kind of comp. But overall, it was mainly Orisa Hog, Orisa Diva, and then Ball or Winston with a Diva. There wasn't any Hog play at all on those control maps. So
Mhm.
those, I mean, and every support was played though. There was
Yeah,
lots of Lucio, Ana, Mercy, Bap. Everything was played. Brig, I think, was played not as much as all the others because Brig is made to counter flankers, and there wasn't a lot of like Tracer play because Tracer just can't get value off of those kinds of things. So it was mainly, you know, all of the other supports, and it just was to the playstyle. If they were running, the Mei Hog, then typically they would have a Lucio to get forward. But if you were
yeah,
trying to play the defensive, you'd have the BAP prevent to prevent the hook. And so it was just like the play styles. Are you going to play the Mei defensively and use the wall to block the hook, or are you going to be using the Mei wall aggressively to ensure that the hook stays? Which is why I think Mei is so crucial
hmm
to the Roadhog, because if you run it without the Mei, your hook is a 50-50 because the enemy team can just sleep you, can put up a immortality field, can put up the defense matrix, can just prevent the hook from getting value. Whereas if you
yeah,
have the Mei, you just put the wall up, and now the other team
and
can't
it's
even
over.
see
Yeah,
their hooked player. So those are the metas that we see. I don't know how that's going to adjust moving forward. I think teams will probably get just better at figuring out when to use certain comps, and it'll probably get more fleshed out on how to counter some of the weirder stuff that was being thrown
Yeah.
out. But I don't foresee any change. I think Orisa is going to be the mainstay, and Hog and Devo will be there with her. I don't
One
think.
thing I hope to see more of, and I think we will. I think we'll see a lot more BAP in the weeks to come.
Mhm.
I think, when he first came out, a lot of people were questioning whether he had a place within goats, or whether he was going to kill goats, which obviously he didn't. But a few teams adopted him a little bit in goats, but you
Mhm.
really didn't see him much. But I think in the weeks to come, teams are starting to bring him out and starting to realize
Yeah.
how much value he can actually bring. His damage output's awesome. His healing is, one of the highest in the game out of the healers in
Mhm.
terms of just consistent group healing. And then on top of that, he's got his immortality, which you can't really counter that.
Mhm.
It's potentially one of the strongest abilities in the game.
Yeah, it was good to see him in rotation because before it was really only the Shock using Rascal like
Yeah,
on him, and so now that we're seeing a lot of teams just integrate him more, I think he just has the place. If you're trying to play defensively, you run the Bat Mercy, the Bat Ana, and so those are good, and I think that is a good. I'm okay with this meta. Orisa Hog is a fun meta to watch. Those Holt hooks are cool, and the Holts are being used for so many other things. So I think that is a good meta moving forward. But then we also saw during the halftime of the Dragons Titans match, they announced they're going to be using Sigma in for playoffs. What do you think? What do you think the implications of having Sigma moving in for the playoff patch and for the finals is going to be?
so I've just got to say I love Sigma. I've been grinding him in my solo queue like since he came out. I think he's awesome. His damage output's insane. um the question comes, what kind of team does he go well with? I could see him taking the place of Diva in some of these Orisa comps.
Mm-hmm.
He has the eat just like Diva does, but he also has a second shield, so he's a little more defensively capable than Diva. I feel like in a lot of
Yeah.
these matchups, his damage output's insane, uh, and so I could see him being a real force, depending on how things get balanced before then.
Yeah.
But I could see him working out well with Orisa. Um, I don't know of any other tanks that he'll really do well with. I don't think we'll see any Ryan Sigma. I don't think we'll see any Winston Sigma.
Yeah.
But I think with Orisa, I could.
His play style doesn't seem to be one of. It was interesting because when we look at him and look at his kit, it's like he has a shield, so like all the main tanks have shields, but then his like, is he a main tank or is he an off tank? Because he's got like the tech of an off tank, but he
Yeah,
has the shield of a main tank. So I think you're right in that. I think Orisa based comps are gonna be he'll take the place of Diva because I think he has slightly more tech than Diva because he has the accretion, the rock
yeah,
that he can use to stun abilities out, whereas Diva doesn't. And where even though his eat, what is it by the I don't even remember what they called it. It,
yeah.
it doesn't have as long of a duration, but I mean it gives him health. Diva's Matrix doesn't give her health, so
No,
who
and I
knows?
think in the Diva Sigma matchup, so if one team runs
Hmm.
Orisa Diva, one team runs Orisa Sigma, I think the Sigma wins that out because you have the Rock to cancel, you have Accretion to cancel the Diva defense matrix
Hmm.
because it doesn't get eaten. And it's really the only ability that can cancel that. And so I think Sigma is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see him in the meta, and I can see him being a big part of playoffs this year.
Yeah, I think it'll switch it up enough that we won't get like 2 or 3 months of Orisa Hog, which I mean will be nice after having like 18 months of goats. But I do worry though that Sigma coming in, then we'll just see a like double shield, which could just kind of be a little interesting because too many shields is a bad thing. But I think it'll be a refreshing for the playoffs coming in and just having a difference of the current meta. But I mean, we're in week 1 of Rollock, and we had some
Yeah.
interesting games this week using this new meta.
Yeah. And honestly, with the Sigma, I don't think he'll completely win out and get rid of Hog. I think Hog, as long as Arisa's in the meta, Hog
Mhm.
will always have a place because, the halt hook is
Mhm.
just too strong.
Yeah.
The easy pickoffs, because, as we saw this week, if you can get one squishy out of the way with the halt hook
Mhm.
combo, the fight's just over.
Yeah, that was
And
that
so,
was that was what we saw in a lot of the games. So let's talk about them.
yeah,
I think let's start with the team that we thought was dead
best team in the league. I'm a
dead in
Justice
the
fan now.
water. The Washington Justice decided they finally wanted to win more than 2 games this season.
Yeah, and
I
I've got to be honest. Like, I almost didn't watch their game this week, but I popped it on, and I'm glad I did. Corey and Stratus just destroyed. I,
Yeah,
I
they did.
I've got to say, don't. I'm not gonna do the hot take and say they're the best DPS players in the league. But if you were to compile a list after just this week, I think both of them would be in the top 20. And
Yeah.
Corey, I would say maybe top 5 on some characters,
Hmm.
probably. Uh, I think they looked really good.
Yeah,
And I think the
they
fact that the rest of their team looked very mediocre makes them look even better.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like Corey and Stratus basically single-handedly won that match. And Sansom on the Diva had some good moments. His hog basically was non-existent. They didn't really play a whole lot of that. But and Guido and Ark had their moments. I think Guido most especially had lots of questionable ults, like that he would pop at the end of fights. But for me, the biggest question mark, and has been all season, and before the season even started, is I don't understand what Giannis's role on this team is. Like when they came out on Busan, back-to-back points, and they had him strutting out on the Reinhardt. I like went blind. I don't know who came up with that, and I want their head because Giannis's Reinhardt should never be allowed in an Overwatch
Oh,
League
yeah.
match ever.
Well,
Like
it wasn't good during GOATs.
no, it
And
wasn't.
at this point, Reinhardt isn't even kind of like there were maybe 2 or 3 teams that brought out Reinhardt for 1 point and swapped after one fight. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't see Ryan this week, and there's a
No.
reason. And I think the Justice's inability to read the meta is just it's terrible for them. And Giannis, I think, is the most guilty when it comes to
Yeah,
players on the Justice.
but I mean, the good thing was they swapped off it as soon as it stopped working. They swapped off the Rhine,
That's
and
true.
they looked good on the Orisa comps. Giannis didn't feed like he always did, and Samsung had some really good eats of ults, and he had some good moments on the Diva, some really good bombs, and Guido and Arc didn't die early,
So,
which has been a problem all season for the two of them, was getting picked off early. But I
so I
mean,
guess the question is like, what exactly, like, what was missing with this team with Goats? Why weren't they able to pull this off?
well, the easiest thing to point to is when we look at teams that were good at goats like Shock and Titans, it was like team cohesion, and it was all about the main tank. I mean, Super and Bumper were like winning fights by themselves, and when you have a
Yeah.
main tank like Giannis, who simply exists, that's a liability. And then like Corey and
No.
Stratus, there's the Zarya and the Brig, just they couldn't really do it. Stratus especially just really didn't have a lot of success on the Brig. So I think the problem with this team is they weren't built for goats. This was after seeing their game this week. This was a team that was built for a DPS meta. It was not a team that was built for goats. And so they came into this match only winning 2 games all season.
Yeah.
They were abysmal. They were not
And
good.
as a result, they are already knocked out of playoffs. They have no chance of going on. But if we got rid of the first 3 stages and just Stage 4 as an island. No other stage. The entire season is 2-2-2
It's
roll
all
lock.
2-2-2 roll lock.
All 2-2-2 roll lock. Where does this team sit?
Well, we do also have to remember they were playing Toronto, who is like the definition of mediocrity. So like we do have to take it with a grain of salt that though they looked good, they were beating on the Defiant. And if the mark of greatness is beating the Defiant, I'm pretty sure 18 teams are on that list. Everybody that's not named Florida. So
And they won, but they didn't destroy. Like,
yeah,
they were close for the most part.
It was a close match against Toronto. So my concern with the Justice is that yes, they won. Yes, Corey and Stratus looked great, but they won against Toronto, and they did lose a map when Toronto decided they wanted to play the Mangachu Genji. So Stratus and Corey are great, but I worry if the fact that the rest of the team just doesn't exist to that level is going to cause problems when they're playing against like full well-rounded rosters like the Shock, like the Titans, that they're not going to be, that Corey and Stratus will be able to do somewhat of their lifting, but then when it comes to the rest of the team, they're just going to get flattened.
Yeah. I do think that Corey and Stratus make up probably a top 4, top 5 DPS line. I think.
Yeah, from what we saw
this
week.
Meta,
yeah.
I would say in this meta, I think, depending on how meta develops, if Corey isn't able to bring out things like his Hanzo, which was insane.
It was.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see more Corey Hanzo play. But yeah, if the meta were to shift suddenly to like a Doomfist meta or something, I think that would be a completely different story. But I think as things stand, their DPS line is awesome.
Yeah, with the double sniper, they are doing good because Corey's Widow and Hanzo was great. Stratus was doing good things on the Hanzo, and his Mei was also really good. I just worry about the rest of the team because as soon as they get to a point where Corey and Stratus can't do anything more, the rest of the team falls flat. There's nobody else on that team that can pull slack if Corey and Stratus are getting countered. So that's my concern with the team moving forward for the rest of the stage is can Corey and Stratus do enough so that the rest of the team doesn't have to do anything, which is a very worrisome thing. It is a 6-man team, but when only 2 people actually know what they're doing, the rest of the team has to not make mistakes, which this team has been prone to do all season. But I think they showed that they actually are alive and they aren't dead, and it's a shame that they're already out of playoffs because I think Rollock is going to do wonders for this Justice team, and I think for them it's GG go next for next season, and that stage 4 is really just going to be the management looking at these players and going, okay, who do we want for next season?
Yeah, and I have the crazy take that they will at least match their total wins from the first 3 stages in this stage.
I mean, they already have 50%. They're already halfway there.
One more win.
One more win. Oh, man.
Okay. So, yeah, I think that's a great place to end with the Justice. I think it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. The next team that I wanted to talk about was the Fusion. I think they had a very interesting week. 2 map 5s, 2 losses on map 5s.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was going on there?
It was interesting because coming into this week, they were 4-0 in map 5s. Like, they were there in crunch time, but yeah, this week they just couldn't deliver. And what was interesting is that when they were playing against the Charge, like they won control and then they went back to control and they just got flattened. And
they didn't just win control; they 2-0'd.
They
and then
rolled Busan, and then they got rolled back when they played Ilios.
Yeah.
For me, the thing was when they were playing the Charge was forcing this Mayhog. Like, they were forcing it hard, outside of control, obviously. And Hotba, Rio, and Nero were way better than Sato, Poco, and EQO. Like,
Yeah.
Fusion was losing the May Hog duel the entire game. And the only maps they won were the maps where they didn't have to play it the whole time. So they won Control when they were running Sombra Reaper, and Charge was like figuring out how to play Sombra May. And then they won Junkertown when they were just able to put the Bastion on the pirate ship and full sail forwards. But like as soon as they got to the other maps, when they went to Volskaya and King's Row, which to be fair, the Charge did come out on the hot Bazaria. So it's not like they were
Yeah,
playing Orisa Hog the whole time, but on the defense they were. Charge was playing Orisa Hog and forcing it, and Fusion were just losing. They were not winning that at all. And I think Poco's Hog is not his strong suit, and I think EQO left a lot on the table with his May.
And I will say Nero had one of the best May performances this week. I think
he did really well.
His Blizzard usage was awesome, which I think the league is still trying to figure out. A lot of teams are trying to figure out when to use Blizzard efficiently, and I think Nero got it down. I think
Nero
there were
had
several
it down.
times I was just blown away by how great his usage on the Blizzard was. I think just overall he had probably the best May in the league this week.
I don't know. Hawksall made a
really
good. Hawksall made a good running for that, but we'll get to that later. But Nero did very well, and I think the Charge as a whole just ran over Philly when it came to those May Hog comps. They did a really good job at forcing Philly to have to play them. But whenever Philly was able to get off of those, and they were able to play double sniper and put EQ on the Hanzo, they discovered how to win maps, but the problem was they weren't able to do that enough. They only really could do that on Junkertown when they were in those overtime pushes, and they put EQ on the Hanzo and just let Carpe play Widow, and they did fine. Because I think the problem was EQO's May wasn't up to par to Nero's, and Carpe was also trying to do who knows what, because he would pick Widow, but then he would always be in the back line, and he would get like one pick and then die. Or he would he would swap Tracer when Tracer wasn't the pick. He was trying to play Hero Ball, and I feel like that's just how Carpe's been all season so far. Even when he was playing the Zarya, he was trying to do things he shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah, and I think that's just part of that's part of the package deal that is Carpe. You get his crazy pop-off moments where he 1v9s, he just dominates sometimes. Yeah. But then you also get times where he just
he ceases to
exist. You don't know what he's doing. He's there, and he goes for these crazy flanks, wastes a lot of time, and then gets killed. And,
I don't
and I think they did. He was that way in both the Guangzhou and in the Chengdu games, where he got caught in really weird spots.
It was such a problem because when EQO when Philly are trying to run that May Hog comp and EQO isn't doing as good as he needs to, Carpe has to step up, but he was in weird angles, but he also was getting countered back by Happy. Happy was popping off, especially on Volskaya. He was having great moments. Same on King's Row. So I think Carpe wasn't outperforming Happy, and with EQO underperforming, and so as well as Poco to their counterparts on the Charge, it just didn't come together for them. But it was an interesting play for Philly against the Charge. They were just forced to play the Hog game that they weren't good at. Poco's great at the Diva, but his Hog is not where it should be for this kind of meta. I think Philly is going to have problems in the future when they have to play that. But then what was interesting is when we look at the Chengdu game, it was the opposite. Chengdu didn't play Hog at all.
No, Chengdu was, and we'll talk more about Chengdu specifically, but they were crazy to watch. It was a whole different meta for them.
Yeah, this game was...
That's how they always have been. I think this match, I think with Chengdu, if they can get a map that is just disorganized or has a lot of weird angles you can take, Chengdu will win.
Chengdu will win, yeah. And that was the maps that they won. But the problem that Philly had was they just didn't know how to win a fight. Either they won the fight immediately or it would drag on for 7 years and all of the Hunters would come back and win it. Like, the
Yeah,
Blizzard World push on second went
yeah,
on for way longer than it needed to, and the Hunters had no right holding that like 2 or 3 times like they did.
it was like 2 minutes. Everyone on both teams died at least once, and everyone on Chengdu died twice,
And they held.
all over a couple meters, and it was just insane.
Fusion just could not finish fights, and it was like that
No,
on every single map, even the
yeah,
maps
the
they
other one that
won.
Ilios was the same way, where it was like Chengdu just can contest points forever, and they just weren't stopped by Fusion. Fusion couldn't
Yeah, they
get
weren't
any.
stopped by Fusion, and I think the problem is because when you're running that double sniper comp, I mean, your damage output is like you one shots. You have to one shot people, and when you're running ball tracer, just stalling points, those snipers
Yeah,
don't have room to operate on there, and so they weren't able to take advantage of the chaotic play of Chengdu, and because Chengdu was out of position so often, but
oh yeah,
Fusion, even though they would pick off one person, like Kyo was getting picked off first, I swear, every other fight, but
oh yeah,
Fusion would walk forward, maybe kill one other person, and then the other 4 would just run around in circles, and Fusion just looked like a chicken with its head cut off, unable to finish those fights. So I feel like Fusion lost the game against the Hunters because they just beat themselves. They couldn't win when they should have because Chengdu doesn't. I mean, they weren't. Philly didn't have to play a Hog May team that was better than them. They could have played Hog May and just won. And the times that they did choose to play the May and the Hog, they did win those maps. But they
yeah.
just didn't choose to use it all the time. And then they just got outplayed in the sniper duel because I mean
Mhm.
Bacon Jack was beating Carpe
Oh,
pretty
Bacon Jack was
consistently.
dominating, and Carpe once again he was just when he was on, and when he wasn't, he just got destroyed. And
Yeah,
I think we saw that a lot in the Chengdu game.
we did. But EQO, I mean they discovered that EQO could play Hanzo,
Yeah,
and they were the only team that I saw that was like, oh, we're not going to nano our Hog. We're not going to nano our Aristo. We're going to nano our Hanzo. And it worked. At the first
yeah.
couple times when we were watching, we were like, why would you nano EQO? But it just kept working,
And
and it,
I
it did
still
really
don't
well.
think it's the right choice, but I guess it's a good choice for them.
Because,
If it wins
yeah,
the fight.
they were winning
But
fights solely off the back of the nano EQO because he was getting 2 or 3 picks simply off of the nano boost, and I thought that was hilarious
oh
because
yeah,
they shouldn't. EQO shouldn't have been getting away with murder on the
yeah.
Hanzo, and then they still lose the match.
So I guess the real question with these though, with these two games is so Fusion lose two. They're sitting at 12-11. They're middle of the pack,
Hmm.
ninth place. Uh, do they just struggle the rest of 2-2-2, or do you think they still are staying for the playoffs?
Yeah,
Do you think they
that's the
turn it
interesting
around?
question because I they struggled against different comps this week. It wasn't like they came out and lost to Mayhog twice. No, they came out and lost to Mayhog once and then lost to Pandemonium the second time. Like, the
Yeah.
Hunters are barely in the 12th seeded spot. They've been doing this all season. Everybody knows they do this. Everyone knows they love playing Pharah and Doomfist, and yet they still lost to them. And I
Yeah.
think Philly is going to struggle against teams that either are just better than them, right? So I don't see Fusion being able to beat teams like the Gladiators, the Spark, the Shock. But I also think that they're going to lose to teams like Shanghai, like like even Houston could beat the Fusion because Fusion is just not going to be able to adapt to what's going on. Even though even though the Outlaws came out this week and accidentally stumbled into winning, I think they could beat the Fusion because the Fusion just didn't. They would win maps where they could play Bastion for some reason, but then as soon as it came to the actual organized Mayhog, Diva, Orisa Diva, they would just fall flat. They either couldn't win fights in the Chengdu game, or they would just lose outright and get stomped forwards like they did in the charge match. So I worry about the Fusion moving forward and their inability to swap properly, but then also to even be able to perform on the counters. I don't know that they're going to be able to do that properly. And they could. I don't think they'll slip out of play-ins. Like, they're solidly in there, but I don't think they have any hope of getting top 6. I think the teams above them are just better, and I think teams like the Charge are gonna jump them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Carpe is just not consistent enough to carry. And the rest of the team, I think, yeah, just like you said, play in, but not top 4, top 5.
That's my concern with them is they're not going to be able to really perform when they need to. They'll be able to play it close, but when it comes into crunch time, I don't think that they're going to be able to perform. And we saw that with Charge, and then we saw that with Chengdu, and Chengdu had no right winning that game because, I mean, they went to 5 against Boston as well.
Yeah, which
So,
I think we should just go right into
yeah,
talking about that. 2 map 5 wins. It's kind of the opposite story of the Fusion.
Mm-hmm.
And man, I love watching Chengdu.
It is an acquired taste whenever they're on board. It's like, all right, here we go. Get your tickets for the Clown Fiesta, because even in GOATs, literal GOATs teams would opt into the Clown Fiesta, which you don't do. If there was anything we've learned over this season, it's you don't opt into the Clown Fiesta because you will lose against the Hunters.
Oh yeah, I think Chengdu are the masters of the mind games. I think there's a lot to break down with their play. You saw a lot of Doomfist.
Yeah.
You saw a good amount of Genji. But I think one of the things that really stood out to me was Elsa doesn't play Hog. Like,
no.
Ever.
When we were watching that Philly game, we're like, they're not playing Hog. And then it got to, can they even play Hog? I think Elsa was on Hog for like 15 seconds during the Uprising game, and then I was like, when I was watching, I was like, oh, they can play Hog, and then he immediately swapped, and I went, just kidding, he can't play Hog. And I don't know if it's he can't or they just choose not to. But I don't know why they would choose not to, because it's not like Among is bad on the Orisa. His Orisa was actually surprisingly good.
Yeah, I was impressed. I wasn't expecting him to be able to pull out the Orisa like he did, but he did solid. But yeah, no Hog for...
Yeah, it puts them in an odd situation, because since they don't play Hog, that means they're never going to play Mei. Now, I don't know if they could play Mei. I don't know if one of their 3 Doomfist players can play Mei. So, I mean, if there's no Hog, I guess you don't have to worry about the Mei, because Chengdu literally only played a handful of DPS heroes. They played Hanzo, they played Widow, they played Pharah, Doomfist, Sombra. And then, occasionally they pulled out the Kree, or they pulled out the Tracer. Like, Bacon Jack pulled those out. But it was mainly Widow, Hanzo, Doom, Sombra. That was it. And Pharah.
Oh, yeah.
And all of them can play Doom. It's such an odd, dynamic with the Hunters, because there's no other team. Every other team's like, oh, they have 2 hit scan players or 2 tracer players. But there's no other team that has all 3 of their DPS players can play Doomfist.
Well, and how often do most teams bring out Doomfist? Like, never. You'll see it maybe once in a match.
It's only Shanghai that uses it.
Dependent. Yeah. And so I think the fact that Chengdu can bring it out on every map and will bring it out on every map is
yeah, that they
it's
can.
An interesting choice. Yeah, and I don't know how it will work long term. I think Chengdu is the type of team that once they're figured out, they lose. I think.
Yeah.
Week 1 is. I think week 1 of any new meta is their time to shine.
Their time to shine, but it's also their time to make themselves look stupid, because I don't know what the game plan was going into Hanamura, but whoever decided to put Jinmu on Genji should never decide a team composition again. Because though they capped first point, it took them the entirety of the time bank to cap.
There was a thought process. and it's very important. They thought, okay, what map is this? Okay, we need to bring out the brothers. And so they brought out Hanzo and Genji just to be lorically accurate.
Yeah, but they didn't. I mean, they didn't play them together. They pulled out Jinmu on the Genji on attack, and then they put Bacon Jack on the Hanzo on the defense for a little bit.
Exactly.
Jinmu swapped to the Hanzo, like him and Bacon Jack played with it. But it's like the Genji Jinmu is not. His Genji's okay, but I don't think it's a Genji that you put all of your resources into. And I think Hanamura, they lost. They lost that map because not only did
Yeah.
they try and play the attack Genji, they then also tried to play the defensive Pharah against double sniper. Like Hanamura was just a map of Chengduing themselves. They thought that they knew what they wanted to play, and though Jinmu is great on Pharah, when you're playing on Hanamura first against Carpe and EQO on Widow Hanzo, I don't think that that's the play.
Yeah.
So even
And I
though
think
they looked good,
the first Jinmu Genji ult was terrible. The first blade. Like, I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure he didn't get a single kill, and he just got nuked.
it wasn't pretty. It was not pretty. So it's like, unless Chengdu overthinks it, I think they're okay. Because it's like, as long as they stick to things like the Sombra Doomfist, things like the Pharah Widow, I think they can do okay, but they have to make sure they are aware of when they can play it. Because when they're trying to play defensive Pharah on Hanamura first, and you know Carpe is on the other side on Widow, you're asking to be rolled. Whereas if you're playing on, on Ilios or on Li Zhang, yeah, you can play the Pharah because you can use the map geometry, but not Hanamura first. You just don't.
Yeah.
So I think the thing with Chengdu is they're so unorthodox that they overthink themselves and they almost lose matches single-handedly. Just they do it themselves. They don't have to have another team beat them. They do it themselves. They lose and gift people free maps. But I think the good thing about Chengdu is they're going to be able to consistently beat lower table teams. Like, Dallas isn't going to come in and beat Chengdu. There's no way. They can't.
Yeah.
A team like
Speaking
Toronto isn't going to come in and beat the Hunters. They're just not.
Speaking of, the Hunters and the Fuel are right at that border there. The Hunters, the Rain, and the Fuel all are tied with the same win rate, 10 and 12.
Mm-hmm.
And that's right on the border of being knocked out. Do you think the Hunters stay and qualify for play-ins?
So when I look at the teams below them, right? So they beat Boston. Yeah, they needed to do it in 5, but they beat Boston. And I think if you can beat Boston, you can definitely beat Defiant. I mean, Washington beat Defiant. If Washington can beat Defiant, anybody can beat Defiant. I think the Hunters are better than the teams below them because they won against Fusion, for crying out loud. And Fusion is 3 spots ahead of them. So I think the thing with the Hunters is that they'll be able to beat the teams below them and hold their spot. I don't think that they jump much higher because I think that the teams above them largely will be able to figure them out. But I think teams below them, like the Fuel, like Valiant, like Outlaws, might be able to take it to them. But I think the Hunters are better at their shenanigans than the other teams are at figuring out the shenanigans. So I think the Hunters are okay in their spot. They're going to play matches way closer than they need to.
It may just be my outlandish hopium, but I'm rooting for the Outlaws to take that number 12 spot. It's going to happen.
I mean,
not this season, but someday.
Yeah, there were interesting games this week, and I think because of all that, and we mentioned that at the start, is that teams, you come out and you're like, okay, NYXL is a top 3 team, and then they get rolled by Gladiators, and you're like, okay, maybe the Glads are good. But then Glads come out and get rolled by the Outlaws, and then the Outlaws tweet after, oh yeah, we figured mid-game that Sombra was good. So I think that teams are still working things out, and the good thing about Chengdu is they know their style because they've been playing it for 3 stages now, whereas everyone else is like, oh, we have to learn how to play DPS again. Chengdu's been doing it from the start. They are the masters at messing with your heads and playing things that nobody else plays. So I think Chengdu are in an okay spot. I don't think they're going to be world beaters, but I think that they're in a good enough spot that they can beat the lower teams beneath them and stay in that top 12 play-in situation, and that if they fall out, it's going to be their own fault, not because they were beaten by other people.
For sure. And I think they're consistent enough that they should stay right there.
Yeah, they definitely should stay.
So to kind of change gears a little bit, now to talk about our favorite team. And by that, I mean a single player on a great team. Vancouver, man,
I
Hacksaw, it
man,
was his week. What the heck? That was
I I didn't expect. I mean, when we saw other teams bring out the Genji, like we saw Seoul brought it out once, Toronto brought it out of all teams, NYXL brought it out with Libero, and like it was okay. And then we saw Jinmu bring it out, and I was like, okay, teams need to stop with this Genji. It's not working. And then Vancouver came out, and they played it like 3 out of 4 maps, and they're just like,
yeah,
no, Haksal will single-handedly win us these games, and they committed. They
oh yeah,
committed to the Haksal Genji. It was insane.
oh yeah. I think the Shanghai game. So for people that might not have watched it for some reason, man, the Shanghai, they won the first map. Vancouver won the next 3, and then later in the weekend, Vancouver just destroyed Florida. Which, I mean, no big
It's
surprise
Florida.
there. It's Florida,
But
and it's Vancouver.
they did it with literally on the blade of Genji of Hakshal's Genji.
Yeah,
Because
and that's the thing. Everything came down to the Haksal Genji.
yeah.
Every defense, it was all the Genji, which is ridiculous because no other team was running it like this. Like other teams brought out Genji, but no one was running it like this.
The only
And
times people were running Genji typically was first point and maybe second point Anubis on attack. The
yeah,
Titans were the only team that went, no, we're playing Genji attack and defense on Anubis. And then
yeah,
they proceeded to pull it out on Junkertown. They proceeded to pull it out on King's Row of all places. They went all in on the Genji. And the problem was, until the blade was up, and to be fair, Haksal would build those blades in like 45 seconds flat.
yeah,
But when the blade took a little longer, they just looked dead in the water. They didn't do anything, and I think that was because they went, we're not going anywhere until Haksal gets blade. Like their entire game plan was Haksal gets nano blade and gets 1 or 2 picks, and then we go in. And
yeah.
so, I mean, the Dragons didn't do anything to it. They lost all of those Genji maps. They just could. I mean, they tried to play like the Youngjin Junkrat. They tried to counter it, as did many other teams who were playing against Genji, and they never successfully prevented. At least on Anubis, every team that played Genji capped first point. Toronto capped first point Anubis playing Mangachu Genji, and if Toronto can do it, I think everyone can do it.
Except
but it's
Florida.
just well, you know.
Well, I mean,
and the Titans game against Florida was just a Haksal highlight reel. I mean, he was getting.
oh yeah,
But he also showcased his Mei. He didn't really play any Mei against the Dragons, but then against the Mayhem, his Mei actually was pretty good.
yeah.
He
Yeah,
played
it was
some
solid.
pretty good Mei. And
It's
so.
hard to tell for sure if that's because he was doing that well or Florida's that bad, though.
Yes.
I think it'll be interesting to see it in weeks to come.
Yes, it will be.
I mean, if he can be talked out of running Genji every map.
No, I think he's. I mean, you heard how Wolf was hyping it up. Every time he pulled Blade, Wolf was like, he upped the volume decibels by tenfold. He's like, here it comes. Here comes the Genji. And repeatedly, he's like, for those of you who haven't seen the Haksal Genji, you're in for a treat. And sometimes when casters say that, the player immediately just papiges and just flops. But Haksal consistently was getting 2, 3Ks, sometimes 4 or 5Ks with these nano blades. And so I think it was good, and it covered the fact that Bumper was almost turbo feeding on the Orisa constantly.
Yeah,
he was thinking he was playing Reinhardt, but he wasn't.
Yeah, that was definitely a consistent theme, and I think teams just don't know how to handle the Genji right now. I don't think Shanghai was expecting to see Genji as much as they did, and I think Haksal proved that it's viable this week. The real question, do you think in future weeks Vancouver is going to be able to do the same sort of thing, bring out the Genji 3 out of 4 maps and just destroy the enemy team?
See, that's a good question because I think that Vancouver will be fine against lower teams. I mean, they ran circles around Mayhem. Like, it wasn't even close. And so I think when the Titans play against teams that are lower than them, which is okay, well, that's everybody.
That's everyone right now.
I think that because I mean Shanghai couldn't do it, but then again, Shanghai is in an interesting spot, and we'll talk about that when we get to them. I think that teams that are coordinated and have a set strategy to it, because we saw just when the Titans played Genji, but when anyone played Genji, the other team immediately went to McCree. Immediately. When
Yeah.
Chengdu pulled it out, Carpe went to McCree. When Seoul pulled it out, Shanghai immediately went to McCree. When Toronto did it, Corey immediately went to McCree. So I think that teams that have good McCree players can should be able to counter it. If your game plan is, if you go in knowing, okay, they're going to play Genji and you build around countering it, I think that's when it stops working. And so the question then is, does Vancouver have the flexibility to win without the Genji? And I think they do. I mean, we saw Hureg play this week, which
Yeah.
I was like, okay, Hureg, I haven't seen him in a hot minute. Where's
Yeah.
Stitch? I thought Stitch was going to be playing today, but Hureg did really well. I
Yeah.
mean,
I was very
he
impressed
was
with
winning
Urag.
duels against DM, and he was doing what he needed to do, and he was winning fights on his own, even when
Yeah.
Hoxall wasn't able to do anything.
And that's one thing I was thinking about. Even when Hoxall wasn't able to pop off and use the ult efficiently, Hureg was able to capitalize on the attention that Hoxall drew to
Yeah,
him. And so I think, uh, you know, if Hoxall wasn't on Gunji, wasn't in the backline, wasn't drawing attention, would Hureg be able to do as well? I don't know, but Hureg definitely had a few really good highlights of his own,
he
especially
had
on the
some good
Widow.
moments.
Yeah, like there was that one Junkertown play in particular that he just popped off, and I think it'll be cool to see him in the future weeks. I think we'll see a lot more Hurek.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like Hoxall isn't just a Genji one trick. I mean, the guy was the best Brig in the league, which is like I don't even know how you do that because Brig like you never talked about the Brig. So I
Yeah,
think the thing that I have to hope is that Vancouver will know when the Genji's not working and swap.
yeah,
I hope that they're not tunnel vision to the Hoxall Genji to a point where even if it's not working, they continue to force it and expect Hureg to pull extra weight to make up for the lack in the Genji. Because when they play against better teams, when they play against Shock or they play against even Atlanta, who looked great this week, I think that I would hope that they go, okay, the Genji's not working, and they put Hoxall on, and they just go to like Hog Mei. Because Hoxall's Mei and Janu's Hog against the Mayhem in particular, it was crazy. And even the few times they pulled it out in the Shanghai match, it was great. So I think Vancouver is good, will be good at other comps, but
yeah,
are they going to have the recognition to go, okay, the Genji's not working, let's play something else? Because if they're not, there's going to be teams that are going to stomp them. And if they do realize that they need to swamp, then they'll be okay because we know that their double sniper is going to be great because Hureg is good on Widow and Hanzo, and Hoxell's Hanzo is also pretty good. So I think Vancouver is okay. They just have to not overthink it and not tunnel vision to the Genji play.
yeah. I think Vancouver, without a doubt, is the best Goats team ever. They dominated the first three splits on it, and I think there are some things that are just universally going to be true with Overwatch. I think team play, whether it's Goats, whether it's Orisa Hog, the coordination is going to be a constant. And I think no matter what, Vancouver's going to have that. I
Yeah.
think one aspect of Overwatch that we haven't seen over the last year is the rock, paper, scissors of it, the swapping characters to counter the other teams. And I think that's one aspect, the in-game decision making that goes into character choice, we haven't seen from them. I think if they are able to figure it out, they could have a perfect split. Will they? I don't think so. I think at this point, I don't know when it will come, but one of these weeks we're going to be shocked by some big upset. I don't know who it's going to be, but one of these weeks I feel like Vancouver's going to be defeated, and I don't think they'll end with the one loss year that they're sitting
No,
at right now.
there's no way they only go one loss because this week they beat Shanghai and they beat Florida and they stomped Florida, but Florida's dead last. They're the
Yeah,
worst team in the league now that Washington has showed they actually know how to play the game. But like the game against the Dragons, even though it was a 3-1 scoreline, it was much closer than it would
Yeah,
otherwise suggest. I mean, Junkertown went to overtime rounds. Even though Kings Row was a full hold, like Anubis went to extra rounds, Junkertown went to extra rounds. Like it was a close game, even though Vancouver did come out on top. And
yeah,
so I think that they, as you were talking about, they haven't had to do the rock paper scissors because this week they just insta locked Genji and won. They didn't
yeah,
have to swap to these double sniper comps. They only had to play May once or twice on against Florida because they would just got tired of the May. I mean, of the Genji. So I don't know how well they'll do when they run into a team that matches them head for head and they have to then actually play a mirror. Like, can they beat, Shock and Orisa Hog? Can they beat even the Charge and Orisa Hog? Because they
yeah,
looked great this week. So I think Vancouver does have some question marks moving forward as to how well
yeah,
they can adapt to other teams who actually can play up to their level.
for sure. Speaking of other teams that can play at that level, potentially, what do we think about Shanghai? I think um, Shanghai
Uh,
had an interesting week. Uh,
yeah. I think
I think,
interesting is putting it lightly.
yeah, I think after watching them win the stage three finals, I was sure they were going to come out and just destroy everyone. I felt like they had countered goats. They had figured out something that worked. They were playing comps that were similar to,
Hmm.
what might be viable now. Um, and they didn't look that amazing this week. They looked okay, but
I
they didn't look amazing.
I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to Shanghai is that with their play style, they can't do what won them stage 3 because they just
Yeah,
can't have Ding, Diem, and Youngjin in at the same time. And personally, I think Youngjin's their best hog, but Youngjin can't play Diva the same level that Envy can. So the thing that Shanghai finds themselves in, and we saw this between the two matches, because when they played with Vancouver, Diem was in all 4 maps, and they were swapping out Ding. They were swapping in and out Ding and Youngjin, whether they wanted to play Pharaoh, or they wanted to play Doomfist, or they wanted to play Junkrat and whatnot. But then when they went to the Seoul game, it was Youngjin Ding for 3 of the 4 maps, and they were running Pharaoh Doomfist constantly against Shanghai.
yeah,
And then DM finally came in for the final map to play. And so I think the thing that Shanghai has to figure out is like, what do they want to play? Because
yeah,
they don't have like each of their DPS players has like their set heroes and there's no crossover. Like DM's their only hit scan player. Like you're not gonna come rolling out on a Youngjin Widow. Like you're not. Like Youngjin and
yeah,
Ding can play Hanzo, but they can't play hit scan. So you have to bring in DM. But if you bring in DM, now you can't play the Doomfist because Ding and DM don't play Doomfist.
yeah,
And they can't play the Widow Pharah Doomfist that they did in stage 3 to win. So
yeah,
their problem is that their flexibility in a certain map is limited by who comes in, and their substitutions immediately give away what they're gonna play. If Ding comes in, you're like, okay, there's gonna be some fair play. If Youngjin comes in, you're like, here comes the Doomfist, and if DM comes in, you're like, okay, here comes the Widow and the McCree. So they're
yeah,
predictable.
yeah.
That
That being
said,
said,
though,
I will say, like, within their predictability, they're some of the best players in the game. I
yeah,
think, you know, like watching Ding on his Farah in the stage finals was a work of art. It was amazing.
it really
And so
was.
I think any of the three DPS on their team, um, I mean, all three of them are amazing in their own right. It's just a
Yeah,
matter of, are they able to play their game? Because if Ding's able to get away with his Farah, if it's not countered by like double sniper or something,
hmm,
they'll win off of that.
yeah,
If they're able to bring out the Doomfist and make it work, they win.
yeah.
It's like they have their niche, and if they're able to make it work, they'll dominate. But the question is the meta going to allow it? And I don't know if it will.
And I think it depends on the team that they play. I mean, luckily Ding can play Sombra, so they have the Sombra there, and Ding. We didn't see a whole lot of May Hog from them, but I mean, it wasn't terrible. But the
Yeah,
problem was their first match was against Vancouver, who decided they just wanted to play Genji. So it's like Shanghai was like, great, what do we do with this? Now we have to play McCree. We can't really do the things that we want to do. And when they played against Seoul, Seoul also decided they wanted to play the Genji, but this isn't illicit, isn't Haksal.
No.
So the illicit Genji, I questioned why Seoul played the Genji as much as they did, because if you're gonna play Genji, why isn't Fleta the one in playing the Genji?
Yeah.
So Shanghai didn't have to play the meta because the teams that they were playing didn't want to play the meta. Because
Hmm.
Ding got away with murder on the Pharah against Shanghai. He literally played Pharah like every map. And he
Yeah.
was playing Pharah on Lijiang Tower of all places, and you're like, what are you doing? I mean, he was playing
Yeah.
it. He was playing it on Ilios, which makes sense. But I mean, when they were playing it in all kinds of places, and so he got away with it. But when they played Vancouver, he didn't get away with it. And even they lost Hollywood to Seoul playing the Pharah. I mean,
Yeah.
Seoul looked like a completely different team doing that. But I worry that they're in a similar situation to Vancouver in the sense that they're relying heavily on these niche ways to win. And the problem is they're going to get beat, and they already did. Vancouver already beat them with it. And I'm wondering if that's why Seoul played so much Genji, was because they saw Vancouver win and they went, oh, Genji's how you beat them. But then Shanghai came in with Ding every map instead of DM every time. So I think Shanghai did learn from that and decided to switch to the Pharah and just switch to the Doomfist. They're limited. They can't play all the heroes, and whenever one of them comes in, it's pretty obvious. And I also don't think that Envy is a great hog. Like, Youngjin is
Yeah.
their best hog player, but
But they aren't going to bring him in as the
he's not
hog.
going to play the off tank. So I think Rollock really limits Shanghai in what they can do. They can't have all three of their basically best players out on the field at once, and there's whatever players they have in, they're limited. If Ding's in, they're either playing Fair or they're playing Sombra. If Youngjin's in, they're playing Doomfist.
So, what do you think the best solution is going forward? Do you think it's just smarter choice of who's in
I
win, or do you think they just need to expand their hero pools?
Well, I think it's a little late to expand hero pools. I think what they need to do is just because I mean they're gonna play teams like Vancouver that they just can't beat. Like if they play Shock, they're done. I don't because Shock is gonna be able to match them with Rascal and with Architects and Sinatra. They're going to be able to take on Shanghai. But I think Shanghai, like Chengdu, is going to be able to beat the teams below them pretty easily because
Yeah.
nobody really plays Pharah or Doomfist as much as they do. So it's hard to prepare for them. So, like they did to Seoul, I think they will be able to pretty handily beat lower tier teams. But when they have to play teams higher than them, like, potentially, Gladiators like San Francisco, and I mean, they already lost to Vancouver, I think
Hmm.
that they're going to struggle. But then as the stage goes on, I think they're going to get figured out because they're pretty two dimensional. It's
Yeah.
unlike Titans, where it's like if the Hawksall Genji doesn't work, they can fall back to being able to play, Hog Mei really well. I don't think Shanghai has that. If the Ding Fair is not working or the Youngjing Doomfist isn't working, they don't really have anything to fall back on. They have like one other team comp they can play, and if it doesn't work, they're doomed. And just they
Yeah.
happen to luck out, and it worked against Seoul, but it didn't work against Vancouver.
So they won stage three. The question comes: what are they going to look like at the end of this stage? What do they look like going into playoffs? I think I would be surprised if they made it past play-ins. I think by that point in the season, I think they'll make it to play-ins definitely. I think,
So, well, the thing is that they're sitting at 13-10, right? So they're literally they are one game back from London in the top
yeah,
6. The problem is their map differential is pretty
was
horrendous.
terrible. Yeah,
So I think the Dragons have to take a win. They have to feast on lower teams, and then they have to hope that a team above them that's in that from 4th to 6th, Spark, Glads, and Spitfire are all at the 14 win mark. They have to hope that one of those 3 teams just forgets how to play the game. And if I were to pick a team that would do that, I would probably pick the Spark, but just because the Spark are known to just crap the bed the first couple weeks of a of the stage. So I think they may lose a couple games and Shanghai can jump them, because Shanghai can beat almost all the teams below them. I mean, they just beat Dynasty, and if they play Charge, they're going to force Charge to play their game. But the problem is that the two teams that I worry the most against the Dragons is the Hunters and the Charge, the two other Chinese teams.
Yeah.
Because guess who also can play Pharah and Doomfist? Oh, the Charge and the Hunters. Nero's Pharah is insane. Jinmu's Pharah is insane. Everyone on the Hunters can play Doomfist, and Happy can play Widow to knock the Pharah out of the sky. So I think the Dragons' hardest battles are going to be in those play-ins matches against the other Chinese teams, because those Chinese teams can play that style and can beat them at it. Even though the Dragons are higher in the standings, I think the Dragons will be beat at their own game if they have to play another team that plays those silly heroes.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think, stage 3 versus right now, it's a completely different game. I think now that GOATS isn't what everyone's practicing, it'll be harder to find holes in other teams' play style as easily. It's less predictable what the enemies will bring out, and I think that goes against what went so well for Shanghai in the stage 3 playoffs. Finals.
I don't know if they can maintain what they did this week against Seoul, because I feel like Seoul boomed themselves into thinking Genji's going to work against them because they thought they were the Titans, which they're not. But I don't think that's going to, because now that Shanghai's played 2 matches, everyone is like, okay, we know what they're going to play. They don't have any other looks. Unlike Chengdu, who just has the natural clown fiesta mystery factor, Shanghai is like, no, we know what Shanghai's going to play. There's no differences in what they play, because that's just how they are. They're very two-dimensional, and that's what makes me worried moving forward. I think they're going to get figured out and eventually probably get beat at their own game, because now everybody's playing it.
Definitely. Okay, so I think that kind of wraps things up for this week. I think those are kind of the big highlights that stood out for me.
Yeah.
I guess now let's look towards the future next week. Let's do some predictions. We have 4 matches that we want to do some predictions for, kind of compare thoughts. The first one, NYXL Chengdu.
Well, even before predictions, like talking how their weeks went, I mean, Chengdu squeaked out wins, but they squeaked out wins against... Okay, well, no, Boston's not a good team. But, I mean, they beat Philly, and I think a win over Philly means something, and NYXL looked dead in the water this week. I don't know what they put in their cereal, but NYXL did not look like the second-best team in the league, even though the standings say they are. They looked lost, especially when you go and lose to a Glads team that got beat on by the Outlaws. I don't have much... NYXL looked iffy in week 1, and I don't know if that's just because they didn't have a good read on the meta or because they just got unlucky. But Chengdu had a good week, but they had to take 5 maps to go against Boston. Yeah. So, I think that leads to a pretty clear who I'm predicting. I'm definitely going for the Pandas here with my flipped text camera. I think we're in agreement, though.
Oh, yeah. I think one of the biggest things for me with that, I like the Chengdu Hunters. I have a gut feeling. But the big thing is, if there's a week for a team like Chengdu to beat a team like NYXL, it's one of these first couple weeks. It's this week. I think NYXL will get their crap together by the end of the season. I think they have those, kind of like with the Vancouver talk, some things just are always going to be a constant. And one of them is just the team play and stuff. I think by the end of this season, NYXL is still going to be a top 3 team.
Just not in week 2.
Just not in week 2. I think week 2, Chengdu has the advantage.
I think Chengdu's been playing
these
it.
characters forever. Chengdu takes it.
And even if NYXL was looking better, I still would predict Chengdu, because they've been playing these kind of comps for the whole season, whereas everyone else has not. So they just have the practice, and that gives them the advantage in these first couple weeks of nobody else has been playing it. Them and Shanghai have a week or 2 head start on everyone else. But then as soon as everyone else starts playing it, then they're in trouble, because now everyone's warmed up. So,
Yeah. Okay, second game I want to talk about for this next week: Sharks versus the Gladiators.
These two, I mean, Shank looked like Shank. Though they only played one match, and it was against Seoul Dynasty, who also got stomped on by the Dragons, Shank looked great. I mean, even in the Stage 3 finals, when they were playing Shanghai, they were playing those Arisa comps, and I mean, they took it to Shanghai.
Yeah.
So, Shock didn't come in. I expected them to be good. I didn't expect them to pivot this well, though. I mean, they came
Yeah.
out with Rascal and Architect and Sinatra on DPS like they had been playing it all season.
Yeah. I
They did
think,
not miss a beat. I mean, they put Smurf on the Orisa, and it was like they had been doing it for 6 months already.
yeah, I think they look great now. They looked great last split. I think, of all the teams that were good at goats, I think they're the best at the Arisa comps out of those
Yeah,
teams.
and it was interesting. And Glads looked good against New York, but New York looked weak. And then Glads went and lost against the Outlaws, doing
Yeah.
sub problem. Like the Outlaws literally messed up their subs and accidentally discovered that playing Dante on Sombra the whole game worked.
Yeah.
So when you go and do that, when you go to lose to a team that's basically improvising on the fly, I'm sorry, I can't predict. I'm going gold, going for Shock. I just
Oh yeah.
don't
Shocker
I
here.
don't think that's controversial. We both think it. Shock is just the better team. I would pick Shock over everybody. I
Yeah.
think Shock are far above the best team just after week 1. Like, yeah, Vancouver looked great, but they were playing freaking Genji. Whereas
Yeah.
Shock were playing everything you're supposed to, and they just looked great at it. So,
I think Glads should be able to take at least one map. I could see it
yeah, I
going to
think
a
it'll
map
be
5.
close. I
I
don't
think
think
it'll
it'll
be
be a
close,
stomp.
but I think Shock will come out ahead. I
Definitely.
mean, yeah. Uh, Next match I want to talk about is Seoul versus the Valiant.
Okay, I want to make our predictions before we talk about these teams because I
Okay.
feel like there could be a split here. So let's show our predictions here. I'm going for the Valiant. We are
Going Seoul.
split.
Yeah. Okay. Explain yourself.
So I mean, this Valiant team looked great when they came out. I mean, with KSF and agilities, I mean they didn't look great on goats. Let's be honest, they're not in the top
Yeah.
12. But I think that your Fate was able to get off of the Reinhardt, and he looked good on the ball when they were playing on control. And I mean, they looked decent. I mean, they did have to take 5 maps to win this week, but I think that the team has what they looked more put together than Seoul did, because Seoul got stomped on by the Shock and by the Dragons, and it wasn't close. I think
Yeah.
Seoul's still figuring out what they want to play, because I fundamentally disagree with them playing Illicit. I really do. When you have Fleta on the bench right there, who can literally play everything, why would you play Illicit, who's definitely not better than Fleta? And I think that Valiant had their stuff together and as a team looked better. And I think out of the two teams, Valiant's got the best player out of the 12 of them. I think Space is far and above way better than Michelle. And I think Fate is better than Marvel. Marvel kind of looks interesting at times. And I think Kusta Kariv is better than Jaehong. I just don't I don't have too much. Jexay and Jaehong are great, but I think Jaehong's
Yeah.
getting on the tail end of the career. And I think Kariv is just a monster on the supports, on Ana and
Yeah.
Zen. So I think
I
it'll be
think
close. I think it'll be a
Yeah.
close one. I think it'll go to 5, but I think the Valiant are just a better put together team right now.
And I get that, but I think when it comes down to it, Seoul is a great team who had a bad week. I think, like you said, there were a lot of mistakes being made,
Mhm.
but I think a lot of those were just, poor planning going into the week. Didn't have a great read of how things were going to play out. And I think next week's a new week. I think this week was enough of a wake up call that I think next week we're going to see old Seoul and not this week's Seoul.
Okay. I think it'll be a good match regardless, but I think
Yeah,
that one is
I think
if
very
Seoul
much
is
it's
able
going
to
to be a
do
game
their
worth
proper
watching.
if Seoul is able to do proper preparation, unlike this week, then I think they can take it. But I just don't think they will. I think Valiant's just going to come out and just be the better team.
Yeah, but I will take you up on that bet. Yeah. I think very possibly going to be the closest match of the week. Just with
Yeah, that one has
the
the
way both
potential
teams
to
look.
to be that way.
Either
Just
it has the potential of both teams just looking terrible or both teams looking great,
I
and it'll be fun either way.
Fair enough.
Um, yeah. Okay. This last one,
The
you
hopium
must have
match. The hopium.
Hiccup must have put this one on the list because it's
Justice are
told
looking
what's
like they
on
can
here.
live, but guess what? I don't think they can do it. There's no way.
Yeah. No.
There's no way.
Justice Titans. There's
There's
no way.
there's no way. There's any. I know, like Stratus and Corey looked great, but come on, they've won 3 matches. Vancouver has lost less matches than Washington has won, and
Yeah.
like Corey and Stratus, I think will easily be able to play up to Hawksaw and Hureg. The rest of
Yeah.
the Justice, they just look like peons. Like Bumper versus Giannis, that's not even a competition.
It's
Janu
funny.
versus Sansum, not even a competition. And I will take Twilight and Slime over Guido and Arc any day. I
I
think
think
Washington got their win.
Justice will take one map from the Titans.
They'll take control. They'll take the
it'll
control
be the
map.
first map. It'll be the first map. Justice come out. Corey will pop off. He'll get a couple team wipes, and then Titans will win the next 3.
Yeah,
I think that's the way it goes.
There's no, and it's just such a, it's literally top versus bottom. And if Washington hadn't won this week, it literally would have been first versus 20th.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Washington Justice looked great, but they were playing the Defiant, and I think they're going to come out next week and get slapped in the face by reality that, yeah, you still suck. Even though Corey and Stratus look great, the other 4/6 of your team is not worth a dang right now.
That being said, I think the one possible scenario that the Justice do all right. So it's kind of like the NYXL Chengdu thing where it's early into a completely new meta. The Titans, they're already guaranteed, end of season.
True.
So there's a world where the Titans don't take next week seriously and the Justice happen to scrape by with a win. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, because
there's a possibility. I think if there's a week that the Justice beat the Titans ever this year, this is the week.
The stars would have to align. Like Vancouver would literally have to do 0 prep, and the Hawksaw Genji would have to get hard countered by Corey specifically. And we saw what the Titans did to Florida, and I mean I'm not saying that Washington's as bad as Florida right now, but half of the team is as bad as Florida right now. Whereas Titans are a full 6-man, they're all good. Washington has 2 DPS players, and anyone who's predicting Washington is on copium that I don't even want to know where they got it. It's not.
I will say the Justice DPS line, I would probably take them over the Titans in this meta.
Just because of what we've seen, yeah, because Hawksaw literally just played Genji. So,
but I mean, the rest of the team is not even close.
No, it's not even close.
I think we've spent too much time on this one already because it's troll that we even
it's the troll game. But it's over. That one's not even close.
And this last little bit, let's talk about the play of the week. Let's pull it up.
Oh, you mean the awesome BM? Speaking of Washington, man, the thing that Wolf brought up when this happened, when they were casting it, is not the fact that he got Stratus, but the fact of how quickly he swapped to the McCree.
It was impressive.
Logic had to, he had that hotkeyed or something, because he literally goes in and I swear he's in the spawn for a second, and then immediately swaps and flashes Stratus, and then he gets Arc later. And yeah, Hawksaw had some great plays, but I think this is just hilarious because he insta swaps Kree, flashes fans, and then proceeds to tactical crouch on his corpse, and then does the same to Arc.
It's the type of thing that you see in solo queue on occasion, stupid stuff like that. But you don't expect the pros to bring it out, and when they do, it's hilarious.
You don't expect them to do this. And it was like Toronto had lost. I mean, this match. I mean, Washington finished the match with 140 in the time bank, and but it was just a good moment. It was like, yeah, Logix, you get him. You
Yeah.
show him who's boss, and then proceed to lose the map. But you know what?
Yeah.
You get the pity points. We're here for pity points. We're all for pity
Yeah.
points. And that was why,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's a troll play. But I was like, no, Hoxall is great, but he didn't insta swap to Kree on a hotkey and kill a Pharaoh. I'm sorry, he just didn't. He just didn't.
Yeah,
I can't
it's
give
true.
it to him.
Nope. And yeah, that's I think that's the best way to end off with that beautiful bit of DM. Well, thank you all for joining in and listening to the Owl Nest. It's been great, and we will talk to you all next week.
Yeah, we'll be
Have a
back
great
next week
and-
to cover the Justice beating the Titans, even though we didn't bet it. We'll
Oh,
see you all
yeah.
next week.
Yep. See ya.